Hi guys, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we're going to be painting a cactus in watercolour, which I'm really looking forward to. So we're going to build up the shapes and then put the little spines on in wet on dry detail. So let's get started. Alright guys, so before we get started, as usual, a quick run through of supplies. So I'm using my Winsor Newton Professional paints here. They're in my plastic palette. I'm using Legion Stonehenge Aqua Cold Press 100% cotton paper in a 7x10 block, so it means the edges are all glued in place there. I'm using my Princeton Round Aqua Elite size 6 brush with a nice pointy tip. I've got 2 cups of clean water, some paper towels, and for this one I'm also going to be using a pencil. So I really like mechanical pencils for watercolour. This one is a Faber-Castell 0.5. It's a really fine tip and it's a really light colour. Because watercolour is so translucent, if you have dark pencil lines, you're going to be able to see them through the paint, so I like to use quite a light one. If you don't have that, you can use a regular pencil and just erase the lines a little bit before we start painting. So let's get painting our cactus. Now, for this I'm going to do a little sketching beforehand just because it's easier to fill the shape in, but you don't have to do that. You can just paint freehand. But the shapes are really easy. They're essentially ovals and circles. So I'm going to pick a line on the floor, maybe there, and then I'm going to do a big oval, and that's going to be our main shape. It doesn't matter if it's wonky. And then on this side I'm going to do another oval, and then another one, and then on this side I'm going to do an oval and a circle, and then 2 little bits on top. Now you'll see they're just random shapes. I don't want them to be completely symmetrical or the same height, but I just want to create, I'm going to level that out a bit, something that's not symmetrical but it is balanced. So I'm happy with that. I don't think you should overthink this stage. There's plenty of details that we can be adding to this. So for our colours, I'm going to be using sap green and hooker's green. So I quite like the mixture together. Sap green is a yellowy green, and hooker's green is more of a blue green. So together they make a really good neutral. So I'm going to mix up some sap green with only a little hooker's green to start with, and you'll see it's quite light. Now the reason for that is we're going to use some wet on white detail to make the shadows for this, but I want to fill in the shapes first. So we'll start with the big shape at the bottom, and then we want to fill in all around this shape. So just fill it in with your brush, use plenty of water, get it all filled in. This kind of way of making a cactus is really loose, it's really stylized. It's not designed to be, you know, a botanical image. It's not a realistic interpretation of a cactus. It's just a fun, loose way to do some painting. You might want to leave a little white space there for a highlight. I love using lots of white space in loose florals and botanicals. Try and make the edges smooth. Don't worry if we go over the paper lines, it's not a problem. We've got our first shape. What I'm going to do is actually fill in the others. Now, the reason I can do this is because I have cotton watercolour paper, which means that it's really good quality and it stays wet for ages, so I've got loads of time to play around adding the details. I'm going to leave a little gap there, just in places. And the reason that's important is that it means I've got time for the paint to stay wet, and I can come back and keep adding to it. If you don't have that kind of paper, I would advise doing this section by section, so you do the wet on white detail while this first shape is still wet. Because if you have cheap paper, it will dry quite quickly and you might not have time to come back and add all of the details that you want. There we go. So I'm leaving just a little gap occasionally. It's to stop it all becoming one big blob. But what I'm going to do is stop there and mix up some darker colour. So I'm going to use more of the hooker's green and a bit more of the sap green, a lot less water, and we're going to make ourselves a darker colour. And here we're going to go in and add it across these edges. So we imagine the light is coming in from this direction, and so we're adding the shadows in the opposite direction. So we start brushing that in there. This is the best bit of watercolour because it allows you to create really natural blends and bleeds. Because it is still wet and the water allows all of the paint to mix together. So this is what we're creating here. Some really good natural shadows. Keep mixing up lots of colour. I don't think you can really go wrong with greens. Now, it's really tempting to try and overblend this to get it really smooth. You can do a little bit, but as much as possible, I really advise leaving the watercolour to do its thing. It just dries so much better and so much more natural when you just leave the very edges of it alone. So I'm going to get it, I want it quite dark on that side, but not too dark because we're going to add the little spines later, and I don't want to make it so dark that you can't see them. So we'll add a little bit more to our other bits, and you can see we're making shadows in the same places, but because they're on different angles, we're going to pull that shadow line across like that. There we go. Back to our other shapes on this side. You can build these out in so many ways as well. You can put the different blobs on top of each other in all sorts of different orders. Once you've got the basic formula down, you can make them into any shapes, fill up any size paper. You can add little pink flowers on top as well. Some people love cactus flowers. It's quite meditative because they're essentially just ovals and circles stacked on top of each other. There we go. I love these little bits at the top as well. They look like ears. I might just make that a bit rounder. You can see because my pencil lines are so fine when I paint over them, there's still a little bit of visibility, but it's not much. The problem you have with watercolour is that it coats over the top of the pencil. So it means you can't erase the pencil lines once you've painted over them. You can see I'm keeping consistency with which side is in the shadow here. One of the smartest ways to do loose watercolour painting is to really get your shadows and highlights in the right order. It works really well for abstract paintings as well, that if you have, you know, shadows in the same place, it creates consistency even if there's not enough detail. And it will make it look like the thing you're trying to paint, even if, you know, in terms of accuracy, it's not quite there. But that's the whole point of loose painting. It's loose strokes, it's artistic and creative, and you're not worrying about whether or not it's, you know, quote unquote realistic. It's not meant to be. It's meant to be a bit of fun, a bit of splashing around with some colours. It doesn't hurt anyone for it to be a loose style. There we go. Okay, I'm pretty happy with how this looks. I'm going to let this all bleed out and dry, and then we're going to come back and add the spine detail. Alright then, so this is dried up quite well. You can see the shadows have blended out really nicely in there. It's quite a natural effect. We've got a few little pencil lines here, but it's not the end of the world. We're going to cover this in some darker spines and things. But you can see, I mean, how visible the pencil lines risk being under watercolour, so you have to be really careful with them. So we're also going to be using the Princeton Aquarelite round size 2. Use whatever brush you've got at home, but you just want a smaller size. It makes it easier to control. And then for the colours, I'm going to use sap green and hooker's green with not too much water. So you want it to be a dark value, but not to the point where your brush feels dry. So we'll get that all mixed up. And then what we're going to do is create flicking motions. You're going to want to start in the opposite corner. So I'm right-handed, so I'm going to start top left. If you're left-handed, you're going to want to start over here. And essentially we're going to place the brush down, create a little flick and lift it up. Now, what we don't want is to create a load of stick lines, so if you can curve these, that will help make it look more natural. And we're also going to work in diagonals, so we don't create straight lines of them. So I create a few details around the top, and then I essentially work in diagonals like that. So we're not going in straight lines. I'll put even more Hooker's green in there, make it nice and dark. You can go back over any as well. So you can see what I'm doing here is changing direction. So some are curving that way, some are curving up. And I'm coming off the edge of the shape as well to give us a really natural look and to create that contrast with the white paper. So it's a little flick motion. The best thing with these is just not to overthink it. If you worry about where you're placing every single spine, you're going to get out of the focus of loose painting. You'll see I tend to trail off from my diagonals as well. That's absolutely fine. It's really hard for human beings to paint random. We think so ordered that we end up creating patterns and everything we do. And so when you're trying to create this, variation, it helps to actually be conscious of the fact that you're going to create patterns. So all of those are now facing the same way. So maybe we do one that flicks down a bit instead of up like that. It's really hard to catch yourself doing it. And sometimes you can see it in the painting afterwards and you think, oh, I wish I hadn't done that. One of the things I'm also going to do is get the darkest side done with the darkest paint, so they really contrast on those shadow bits. And then I'm going to lighten the mixture that I'm using for the lighter side, the side that's in the sunlight. So we'll mix that up a bit lighter, and it will just help us, got a bit of dust on there, it will just help us keep that contrast and keep that consistency in the light levels. There we go. So can you see how these are much darker than these ones? Curve a couple down. There we go. You can see I'm moving quite fast with this. One of the reasons is to try and keep it loose. If you struggle with loose painting, one of the things you can try and do is set yourself a little timer, 5 minutes, 2 minutes, however you want to do it, and then you have to finish that area in that time. And it really forces you to make instinctive decisions rather than, agonizing over them, overthinking them. The idea is not necessarily to rush, but to just give yourself a bit of pressure so that you can make the decisions without overthinking them. It's so satisfying when they all go in. Oh, just managed to flick that down the paper. Never mind, it adds a nice texture. Happy mistakes, as Bob Ross would say. I'll just pick that up. So don't like that one there. If you make a mistake, you can fix it while it's wet by adding a load of water and then using a bit of a paper towel or something else absorbent to dab the paper and pick it right back up. It's more tricky once it's dried, but if it's a small area, you usually can pick it back up with that method. You have to make sure that your paper towel is really clean as well. There we go. Oh, now I've dripped over there as well. Right, I'm going to stop there. I really like how these are kind of loose and hairy. They're quite, textured. You can add a little base in here. You can add some flowers if you want. But this is my method for painting a cactus in a loose style. Alright, so there it is, all finished. It was so much fun to paint and the flicking motion is just so calming. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Please let me know in the comments what you would like to see next. See you in the next one, guys.